In this video, you will learn to divide with 2 and 3 digit quotients. Now remember, the quotient is the answer. So we're working with questions where the answer is 2 or 3 digits in length. And now before you do this lesson, make sure that you know how to divide when the answer is only 1 digit. Because what we're doing here is we're building off of that knowledge. Alright, so jumping right in, let's explain our first example. And let's say we had 93 students in 4 classrooms. And the question was, how many students were in each classroom? Well, this would be a division problem. We would take 93 and divide it by 4. So we set it up the same way as if you're dividing with a 1-digit quotient. So the 93 goes inside, the 4 goes over here. And in case you cannot see this clearly, we'll outline it right here. So we have 93 divided by 4. So what we're doing here is we are seeing how many times does this number, the 4, go into the first number over here, the 9. So how many times does 4 go into 9 without going over? Well, 4 times 2 would give you 8, right? So 4 times 3 would be too big. 4 times 3 is 12. It's bigger than 9. So the number that we want is 2, because 4 goes into 9 2 times. Now we can take the 2 and then multiply it by the 4. 2 times 4 is 8. And then we can subtract 9 minus 8. That gives you 1. Now before, when there was only 1 digit in the answer, the 1 would be your remainder. But here we also have a 3 that we need to take care of. So this 3 here we need to bring down. So bring it down over here next to the 1. And then repeat the entire process all over again. So now we ask ourselves, how many times does 4 go into 13 right here? So how many times does it go into 13 without going over? Well, that's going to be 3 times, because if we take 3, multiply by 4, that gives you 12. And then we can subtract 13 minus 12, that gives you 1. Now there's no other numbers over here next to 93, which means that we are done with our division process. This 1 right here is our remainder. So we can write this as 23 with a remainder of 1. So that's your solution, 23, remainder 1. So if you're one who likes to memorize steps, if that helps you with knowing what to do, the steps right here are summarized, where step 1 is divide, step 2 is multiply, step 3 is subtract, and then step 4 is to bring down. So if you wanted, you can make an acronym. So take D, M, S, and B, and you can make your own sentence out of that if you want to help you remember. You can be creative with that, but the steps are divide, multiply, subtract, and bring down. And then if you wanted to, we can check our answer, where what we do is we take this 23, multiply it by the 4, and then we add the remainder. So if we do 23 times 4 plus the remainder of 1, that should give you back out the number 93. So if you do 23 times 4, 4 times 3 is 12. So we take the 2, carry the 1. 4 times 2 plus 1 is 9. So that gives you 92 plus the 1, that gives you 93. So we can check our answer, and because this 93 is the same number as a number right here, that means we have done the problem correctly. So the answer is 23, remainder 1. That was the correct solution. And if you look at the context of the problem, we were told 93 students are in 4 classrooms. So if we have 23 remainder 1, what that means is that each classroom has 23 students, and then there's 1 student left over, which means that 1 student would need to go in one of the classrooms to make 24 in the 1 classroom. So each classroom is going to have 23 students, and then 1 classroom is going to have the extra student, so 1 classroom would have 24 students. So that's the way you can interpret this problem. Let's try another example. Here we are told that there's 837 marbles in 6 jars. And the question is, how many marbles are in each jar? So if we're dividing evenly, figuring out how many are in each jar, we'd have to do 837 divide by 6. And remember, this fraction bar means division, so we can express division like this, 837 over 6, or we can write it with the division sign. Either way, our process for solving is going to be the same. We take 837, write it inside of this half rectangle, and then put 6 over here, the number we're dividing by. So now we can begin our process. So we can begin by dividing. So we do 8 divided by 6. Or in other words, we see how many times does 6 go into 8 without going over. And that's going to be 1 time. So we put a 1 up here. And then we can take the 1 and multiply it by the 6. We do 1 times 6 to get 6. You put it right here. That was step 2, multiply. And then step 3 is we subtract. We subtract 8 minus 6, and that gives you 2. Step 4, we bring down. So here we're going to bring down just the next number, which is the 3. So bring down the 3 and put it right here. So we brought it down right here. Okay, now we can repeat the process all over again. Step 1 is divide. So we do 23 divide by 6, or in other words, see how many times does 6 go into 23. Well, 6 goes into 23 3 times without going over. So we put a 3 up here on the top. Step 2 is multiply. So we take 3 times 6, that gives you 18. We put it right here. And then step 3 is subtract. So 23 minus 18, that gives you 5. And then step 4 is bring down. So we bring down the next number, which is the 7. So now we have 57 right here. And then begin the process one more time. So then we divide 57 by 6. So we're asking how many times does 6 go into 57 without going over, and that is 9 times. Now we can multiply the 9 times the 6, that gives you 54. We put it right here. Step 3 is subtract. So 57 minus 54 gives you 3. And there's nothing more to bring down. So here, this 3 is our remainder. So our solution is 139 with a remainder of 3. And in the context of this problem, what this means is that each jar, so all 6 jars, would have 139 marbles. And then here, remainder 3 means there are 3 marbles left over. So that means we could put 1 extra marble in 3 of the jars. So 3 of the jars would have 140 marbles, and then the other 3 would have 139 marbles. Now again, we can double check our solution if we wanted to. The way to double check is we take your answer, 139, multiply it by the divisor, the 6, 139 times 6, and then add the remainder of 3. If you do 139 times 6 plus 3, we should get back out 837. Let's take a moment and double check. So 139 times 6, we do 9 times 6 to get 54. So take the 4 and then carry the 5. 6 times 3 is 18, plus 5 is 23. So we take the 3 and then carry the 2. Now we do 6 times 1 plus 2, that gives you 8. So 139 times 6 is 834, plus the 3 is 837. So notice that does give you the same answer, the same number as right here. So because of that, we do have the correct solution of 139 with a remainder of 3. Let's try another example. Here we have 163 divided by 3. So again, to set this up, we put 163 inside, and the number we're dividing by would go on the outside of this half rectangle. This one's a little bit different because up to this point, we would just see the first number here divide by 3. Or how many times does 3 go into the first number, the 1? Well, 3 doesn't go into 1 at all, right? 3 is bigger than 1. So when you have that, if this first number is too small, if the divisor does not go into the dividend, what you have to do is you have to extend and now look at the 1 and the 6 together. So here we have 16, and now we're asking ourselves, 16 divided by 3 is what? Or how many times does 3 go into 16? So how many times does it go into 16 without going over? Well, that's going to be 5. So if you put a 5 up here, we would now take the 5 and then multiply. So we did step 1 was divide, step 2 is multiply, 5 times 3 is 15. Step 3 is subtract, 16 minus 15 is 1. Now we can bring down the 3. So we bring down the 3, that was step 4, and then repeat the whole process all over again. So now we ask ourselves, 13 divided by 3 is what? Or in other words, 3, how many times does 3 go into 13? Well, 3 goes into 13 4 times without going over. And then 4 times 3, the next step is 12. Step 3 is subtract. 13 minus 12 is 1. And then step 4 is bring down, but there is nothing more to bring down. So what that means is that we can stop here. 1 is the remainder. So what we have is 54 with a remainder of 1. So 54 remainder 1 is your solution. And again, if you wanted to, you could double check your work, and you would do that by taking 54 times 3 plus the remainder of 1. So if you do 54 times 3 plus 1, we should get back out 163. Let's confirm that here quickly. 4 times 3 is 12. So we take the 2, carry the 1. 3 times 5 is 15, plus the 1 is 16. So what we have is 162 plus the 1 is 163. So notice that is the exact same number that we had right here. So that confirms that our solution was correct. 54 remainder 1 is the solution. Let's try one more example. Here we have 712 divided by 9. All right, so what you do is you put 712 inside, 9 on the outside, and then you can begin your process by dividing. Now here again, normally we would look at the 7 and see 7 divided by 9 is what, or in other words, how many times is 9 going to 7? But that's going to be 0 times. 9 is bigger than 7. So what you have to do is you have to extend and look at the 7 and the 1 at the same time. So now we're asking 71 divided by 9 is what? Or in other words, how many times does 9 go into 71 without going over? So that's going to be 7 times, because 7 times 9 is 63. And then when you subtract 71 minus 63, that gives you 8. All right, so now we can bring down the 2 and then repeat the process. So we divide 82 by 9, or in other words, how many times does 9 go into 82 without going over? Well, 9 goes into 82 9 times, so put a 9 up here. And then step 2 is multiply, 9 times 9 to get 81, and then subtract. 82 minus 81 gives you 1. So 1 right here, that is your remainder. So your solution is 79 with remainder of 1. And now to double check your work, what we can do is we take 79, multiply it by 9, then add the remainder of 1. So 79 plus 9, or times 9 plus 1 should give you 712. So we can verify that, because if we do 79 times 9, 9 times 9 is 81, so take the 1 and then carry the 8. 9 times 7 is 63, plus 8 is 71. So we have 711 plus the 1, that gives you 712. So because that number is the same as your dividend, that means we do have the correct solution of 79 with a remainder of 1. Now before wrapping up the lesson, I want to point out one thing here with this problem. And that is, how do we know if the number we put up on the top is correct? Like maybe what if it's too big or too small? How do we know that? Well, here remember we said we looked at 71 and we saw how many times did 9 go into 71. And the number was 7, right? Well, what if you put the wrong number? What if you put an 8, for example? Well, if you put an 8 up here, 8 times 9 is 72, so you have to put that down here. And your next step is subtract, which you can't do. 71 minus 72. It's going to give you a negative number, which doesn't make sense. All right, so 8 is too big because when you multiply by 9, 72 is bigger than 71. So that's how you know if it's too big. Now, how do you know if it's too small? Well, if it's too small, let's say you put a 6 here. Remember, it's supposed to be a 7. Let's say you put a 6. If you do 6 times 9 for the next step, we get 54. When you subtract, this is when we'll find out if the number was too small. Because when you subtract, what you're going to get is 7, 1. You're going to get 17. So if this number is bigger than this number, then you know that this 6 is too small. Because what that means is that we can fit another 9 in here. Right? You can put another 9 in here into 17. So 17 shows that the 6 was too small. And again, remember the correct number up here was supposed to be a 7. So those are some tips you can use to determine if you have the number that's correct or if it's too big or too small. And that concludes our lesson for today. We will see you next time.